This video is sponsored today by the Esoteric Academy. If you're somebody who's been meaning to get in shape or longing to go to the gym or yoga studio or Pilates studios, but you frankly are intimidated by that, or maybe you just don't have the time to add another stop, another location to your already busy schedule, then the Esoteric Academy is perfect for you. The Esoteric Academy is an online mystery school where we have a library and multiple playlists full of different exercise videos, from fusion bar classes to yoga classes to walking classes to all strength and stretch classes, mobility classes, and all these exercises are brought to you by master teachers, including myself. You get to do this in the privacy of your own home at your own leisure. We have all different times. We have hour-long exercises, 30-minute exercises, 45-minute exercises. We've even started a playlist for children. With the Esoteric Academy, you also get one live exercise class a month with me, and you get to join the community of other people who are on this platform. Not only that, with these exercises, we also give you the spiritual information regarding physical exercise to hopefully give you more meaning and purpose to your body, so you start to see your body in a different way. If this is something that you're interested in, there is a link down in the description box below. You do get 7 days of a free trial to make sure that you like what we have to offer. If you want to just do, after the 7 days, if you want to just do the exercise portion of this mystery school, this academy, it's only $25 a month. You get all these exercise videos for $25 a month only. And of course, if you would like to participate in the courses on top of that, there is an extra tier for that. But if the exercise is all you're interested in, and that's all you want is something that you can do in the comfort of your own home without having to go to a gym or a yoga studio, then the $25 a month will be sufficient for you. Hope to see you over on the Academy. We would love to have you. Now let's get on with the show.
Right, I am co-hosting with my bestie Bryce from Esoteric Atlanta here, and we are both welcoming back someone that we really wanted to get back, who's been on both our channels, Jamie Mustard. Now, Jamie Mustard is a conceptual artist, an artistic director, and a writer, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Child X, and so many things that Jamie brings out in that book that are so relevant to everything we're all going through at the moment. So first and foremost, Jamie, how are you doing? And welcome, Bryce.
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be talking to both of you because I enjoy talking to you both so separately. So it's cool to be able to kind of have like a round table.
Yeah. And I will say too, and I'm sure you'll do this, Catherine, as well, for people watching from Esoteric Atlanta, I'm going to tag the past episode from my channel as well as Catherine's channel with Jamie down in the description box below as well, so you can reference our past episodes too.
Yeah, I think that's really important so that we don't give you some context to the discussion.
And one thing that's really cool, you just made me think of it in the intro, and maybe you could show it or use it as a screen thing. I don't know. But long before I ever even dreamed of writing Child X, because I'd really made the decision that I was going to die with all these secrets, right? I thought one thing I've been realizing lately as I processed it is the only way I was ever going to tell it is the way I just told it, which was tell all of it and tell it my way, or tell nothing. Yeah. And I never thought that a publisher would let me tell it my way. I just never thought I would be ever be in. I knew I could get in a position to maybe write a book about it, but never. I didn't think I would be able to do it my way. And I want to say that Child X is the whole story. And I will say it's really hard to read, even as the person that wrote it. It was hard to edit. So the first part, I just can't believe I went from this is just going to make me more of an other, and I'm going to have, to live with more kind of isolation from people because it's such an exotic, strange story, to how am I alive, and how have I been living with this all these years? So it's been it's starting. I've had moments of terror where I've said, I can't believe I'm going to show this to the world. And then but then I've been processing that and going and feeling a tremendous sense of relief. And the last thing I'll say, in terms of art, is during COVID, before there was ever, as I said, any concept of Child X, I wrote a graphic novel that's also coming out a couple months after Child X, that really was telling the story as a future sci-fi fictional story, right? So, and that was kind of a weird book. It's kind of an art book that I collaborated with a woman in Southern Italy. And it's really a piece of conceptual art. And I thought that would never sell. I thought it was too cool or something. And that sold. So it's really strange that this graphic novel, which is fiction, because I was never going to write Child X, there's scenes in both books that are almost exactly the same, even though one of them is kind of supernatural and sci-fi. So it's just interesting.
I love it. I love it. Now, for people that don't know the sort of background of Child X, can you give an introduction to the book, Jamie, and your background basically that's led to this book?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's been a lot of books. There's probably, it's been since 1970, there's been a lot of books written on Scientology, 50 to 100 maybe, right? I don't know. And there's a couple of kids have written some good books. But I don't know that there's ever been something that really tries to approach the child question of what does Scientology mean for a child, and or especially in the inner Navy for a child. And so I think that it's the first existential look on what extreme poverty, psychological manipulation, psychological, and maybe even some physical, I would say there were times where I felt like I was tortured. Okay. Are explored in an existential way, and in a way that speaks to the human condition, not just the Scientology experience. Mm-hmm. And I guess, the last of it is my story, is not a story that's been told. There was a period before the Big Blue Building where some things happened that have not been told in any book. And they're too incredible to believe. And they're in Child X.
Is that why you think no one's told these stories? Is they didn't think they would be believed up until now? Or why do you think people have avoided sharing?
Well, the historian, the Scientology historian, John Atack, once said to me that there was a quote out there. He might have even sent it to me, where Hubbard said, if it's too incredible, it will be unbelievable. Mm. And I think that's really the story of what this is. If you look at things that the Office of Special Affairs does, if you look at the history of what I experienced, okay, and you just heard parts of it, it sounds kind of outrageous. It sounds kind of impossible. And I think maybe that's why I felt like, okay, unless you could tell all of this the way you want, and you don't ever do it, because all you're going to be doing is othering yourself more. I mean, I'm somebody that's, grew up as an extreme other. I grew up in this really extreme poverty in these slum dorms, with a volume of roaches and lice and disease that you would be hard to imagine. And I didn't have a father. I'm a mixed person. right? So I'm not trying to like whinge. I'm not trying to, be like Prince Harry. I'm not complaining. Okay. Okay. Um, but I think that one of the reasons, and this is, I mean, I've processed a lot since we last talked, both of you. And I think that one of the reasons I reached out is because I think talking to both of you individually has really helped me process. You, Bryce, in terms of talking about um, the karmatic nature of my indoctrination and explaining a lot of that stuff to me in our conversation kind of really made me think. And you, Catherine, I felt like had this really powerful understanding of the interiority or the existential part of that. So both you got talking to you. It doesn't surprise me that you're friends. It just really made me think. And yeah, I've really come to terms with this idea that one of the reasons I was silent is unless I could tell all of it, it kind of wouldn't make any sense.
I love that.
Yeah.
There's so much there that I think is so important for all of us, Jamie, because, when you look at people discovering what world they're living in, as a child, when you go through that, you've got no point of reference to start to compare it to. But as we grow up and we expose ourselves to different things and, life takes us in different directions. Do you think, Jamie, with what's the state of the world and really the state of trauma that so many people find themselves in, that what you went through as a child and not wanting to share your story, that everyone's got a little bit of that in them? They want to share things that they've discovered or known or truths that they've discovered, but they don't think they're going to be believed. And that's just another level of trauma that they would have to cope with.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really powerful sentiment. I interviewed a sexual assault victim. I mean, it happened to her a few years ago on camera, who received the treatment that I promote. A few years ago, she had been through this experience, and I asked her, this is modern society, a modern woman, an educated woman. I asked her if she reported it to the police or if she reported it. And she said, absolutely not. I could never revisit that. And, I found when I first spoke out kind of a year and a half ago that I got maybe hundreds of emails or on Instagram, messages on Instagram, not emails, messages on Instagram. And most of the people that emailed or messaged me were not people that were ever involved in Scientology. I think there's something about Scientology that's exotic, where people can look at their own trauma through a prism, and it helps them process their trauma. When that happened, I felt more desirous to talk about it, because I thought, oh, okay, if this experience can speak to a broader swath of people, not just the kids that I grew up with, who are very important as well, but if it could say something about the human condition on a broader level, then it's important. Yeah.
It's a service. It becomes a service to humanity. Well, it's interesting, like how, I keep my mind, like we kind of were talking about this off camera, like when you believe a lie, and we've all believed lies. There's all of us, no human being on the face of this earth has never not believed a lie. But when that lie all of a sudden is exposed as a lie, even though the lie was not good for you, that's also traumatic too, because that's what before we signed on, I was listening to a podcast from a girl who grown up extremely fundamentalist Christianity. And like the total breakdown of her even belief in God. And even though I grew up in a Christian home, it wasn't fundamentalist, but we've all had that experience where the lie becomes exposed. And then actually, I was just Googling while you were like, I wanted to look at the actual definition of shame, which I don't like the definition they've given me of shame. So I'm not going to even bring it up, because Mr. Google, that's not a good definition, because shame is so much more than like humiliation, in my opinion, or embarrassment. Shame is a totally different level of that type of feeling. And that shame that people carry when they are the victim of something, when they had no, you were a child. For a woman who gets assaulted or or RAPED will say, you know, a lot of times there's that great museum or installation that's been traveling around the United States where they have all these outfits of that people were wearing, not just girls, when they were attacked, to show people that they were dressed in, some of them in like sweatpants, you know, and but you carry that guilt because you, even though you participated in this stuff against your will, you were still there. And I think once that is such a common human feeling where there's parts of ourselves that we just want to hide so deeply because we're so unbelievably ashamed, even though like you as a child, Jamie, for most of us, a lot of these things happen when it was not in our control. And Catherine was right. There is a point where we don't have any type of awareness of something being different because when we're children, it's just all the same. But it's also, as an American, I mean, Los Angeles, just to live in a country, a wealthy country like the United States or Great Britain or any of these Western world countries that are wealthy countries, to understand that there are people living in that level of poverty is a stain on the country itself too, because that shouldn't happen in a wealthy country, right? And the fact, and that also, I think what's uncomfortable too, Jamie, is that when we have these, even though people have freedom of choice, freedom of religion, what does the community, what does the country do about situations with like children? You know, is that embarrassing for the country? I know that this doesn't happen just in the United States. There are centers in the UK, there are centers all over the world, and not just Scientology, but different religious facilities where children are being, I mean, at what point, why is it that some, like the government will step in some child cases, but won't come in with something like a situation? Does that make sense? Like there's a lot of shame.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things I would say. One thing that I'm thinking is that, you know, I often find in these kind of early interviews that I've been doing before I kind of, you know, the book comes out, the media will get bigger and more dense, is that I find myself almost feeling like I have to like acknowledge and speak to the kids, people that might still be in,
Yeah.
or even the Office of Special Affairs that might be watching to see what I'm saying and to justify what I'm doing, because inside that thing, everything is black and white.
Yes.
Right. So the minute I start to say there's anything negative about Hubbard's naval religious movement, okay, whatever you want to call it, they have a mechanism that they've been taught, inculcated with, that says that I'm bad and I'm evil and I'm trying to destroy them and I hate them. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I don't want to be cheesy and say that I love them, but, you know, it's kind of like that message, you know, at the end of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, right? I am them and they are me. I feel like they are me. I don't feel like I'm attacking them. I feel like I need to stand up for myself. I need to be able to say what happened so that I can be a whole human being.
Yep.
You know, like living your whole life pretending that this mini little child catastrophe, this little mini child Holocaust, and I'll only use that word because I should be dead. Mm-hmm. And if you read the book, you'll see it, right? And then going, oh, I'm fine. Nothing happened. I'm fine. You know, just make it go right. You know, we have to save the planet. So if you have to crack a few baby skulls to save the planet, then that's what we do. That stuff is still in me. And it's not in me in like a sarcastic way. It's in me like, well, you know, should I be saying something? Like, I care about these people. All those people, I grew up with so many of the people that are still in there. I love them.
Yeah.
And they're good, you know, but, you know, so two things. One is, I think another reason that I was really hesitant and not wanting to do it is this concept of a survivor. Now that at Child X is kind of out and around, people will call me up and say, oh man, you're a survivor, or the few people that have read it for endorsements or something. And I cringe when I hear that. And the reason I cringe when I hear that is I'm not interested in living the rest of my life in relation to what they did to me.
Yeah.
So if I'm a survivor, then I'm living in relation to my childhood experience. So they don't only get my childhood, now they get the rest of my life and my adulthood. I'm not willing to do that. There's an incredible French intellectual named Henri Bernard Levy. He's like the French Indiana Jones, but he's a real person. And he wrote he's a Jewish guy, and he wrote a book about, I mean, I didn't read the book, but I read an article on the book, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And the book is about how, and he got death threats from other Jews when he wrote this, basically saying, you know, he thinks that if you want to have a true religious experience, you shouldn't be experiencing God or experiencing religion in relation to trauma or persecution. I'm paraphrasing. You might watch this and cringe. You should be having a solar relationship with God, right? That really, when I read that article, it really hit me, even though it was decades ago. And I want to have a solar present relationship with my life. That being said, I would add this last piece, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. But there's this incredible, God, I'm such a movie watcher. I do read voraciously, but this is another book where I saw the movie and did not read the book. Okay. But there's a book out there by a famous Japanese novelist called Never Let Me Go. He's a British Japanese novelist. So I think he lives in London. Okay. And it was made into an incredible film with Carey Mulligan and Andrew Garfield. It's maybe from the early aughts. And it's about these children that are being raised in this very nice kind of school, like a public school, in the English countryside. And they live well, they've got beautiful buildings, and they're given I guess Charlotte Rampling plays the head schoolmarm or the mistress, and they're given good food, and they're going to chapel, but something is off, and you don't quite know what it is, right? And as you watch the film or read the book, you find out that these children are being raised to have their organs harvested for the rich people in the world. So the reason they're being treated really well and being fed good food and living decently is because they need them to be healthy, so that when they get 18, 20 years old and the rich people need body parts, they have healthy body parts. Now, here's what's fascinating about this film. It's the only film that I've ever seen that encapsulates the feeling of what it was like to grow up in the Inner Navy, in the slum apartment buildings owned by the Inner Navy, and that militaristic system. Because when they hit 18 or 20, that's when they start having to give up their body parts. And they start going through these procedures. And they talk about, like, some people die after 2 procedures. Some people die after 6 procedures, right? But they slowly are having pieces of them taken away. Okay. And that's kind of how I feel, even though I say the one thing, like, I don't want to live as a survivor. I also feel like that I have had chunks of myself taken away that I'm never going to get back. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then lastly, what's very interesting about this book or film, Never Let Me Go, is they can move around. They can drive to different clinics. They have friendships amongst each other. You know, you can live longer if you work as a guide to help the other kids go through it. Then you don't have to go start going through the procedures till you're 30. And you see them going around and kind of driving to different places, and you're like, well, just drive off and go away, right? But it would never even occur to them. And it's kind of what you were saying earlier, Bryce, about, here I am in LA. I mean, I'm free in one of the largest cities in the world, but I couldn't have been more in a bubble. Mm. I couldn't have been more in a prison, right? So I would highly recommend, if people want to understand what the experience was like, watch Never Let Me Go. Okay, it's an incredible film too.
Oh wow! Yeah. I'm going to. Yeah, I was so frantic. Every time I speak to you, Jamie, I write so many notes because I'm like, right. But what you said there was so incredible, because at the moment there's so many people talking about what is our reality that we're living in, And are we living in the Matrix and the analogy of the Matrix? But the fact is that so many of us are programmed to just live from our five senses, and you don't think to question things until something comes in from the outside that actually wakes up another bit of some sort of your perception or senses to question something. And how many of us are seeing this at the moment, where once you've got a different view on life, I mean, you've been through so much trauma, and I do want to come back to the shame actually, if we can, in a minute, because I think that's such an important discussion. But then when you start seeing something else, every bit of your belief system, every bit of the context of who you are and where you fit into this world is shattered. And I think when we're talking about people awakening, which is something that Bryce and I talk about a lot, this is why people can't be forced to go through it and have to go through it at their own time and their own place in their own world. Because even if you think you're seeing all this extra knowledge, you're still only seeing a tiny bit of it. And we talk a lot about the black and white thinking and the fact that people think it's A or B, but no, there's 50 shades of grey in between. So your experiences and what you're documenting and sharing in the book, I think everyone needs it, because everyone needs to understand that we're all in our own sort of little prison, hopefully not as extreme as what you've had to go through, but in terms of understanding the world and our place in it, we're so shaped by those early experiences that actually can brainwash us into not looking outside the box that we might be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that shapes my experience is the fact that it was from birth.
Yeah.
I went straight into these facilities at birth. There's no baby pictures of me. And one of the things that was really powerful was a week before I did my first interview, my half brother, did an interview. And somebody in the chat said, "Whatever happened to Jamie?" And I'd asked my brother not to talk about me.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it came up, and I'd asked the host not to talk about me because I knew I was going to do an interview in a week, and I said, "Just don't bring me up." And it was somebody, and they had a weird username like Supermama72 or something. It was weird, or Supermama65 or something. And so they just ignored the question, even though they brought it up. Then they quickly kind of just got rid of the question. And then my brother called me 2 days later, and he said, "I got an email from this person that we ignored in the chat. If you watched it, I'm sure you noticed it. And again, whatever happened to Jamie?" Right. And I don't know if we talked about this in either of our interviews, but it turned out that there was a young girl that was my caretaker in that baby facility who was 7. And, this woman had not been able to get me out of her head for 45 years. Right. Yeah. She had not been able to get me out of her head for 45 years. And it was powerful because I have baby memories. So she was able to not only confirm that my memories were true, but she was able to fill in and tell me some things that happened to me that I didn't remember, that were pretty, horrifying. Right. So, one thing that I think that the Child X explores in a powerful way, and I would love both or either of your takes on this, is the denial of the nervous system, the denial of the feelings of the body. I mean, late in the book, I do at some point an existential examination of this, right? How I was taught from birth to deny how I felt about something, to push through. Okay. And almost trained to deny the body. You train like that for 15 years. You're going to wake up at 15, 20, 25, 30 years old, and you're not going to have any empathy because you're like your body, our body tells us when something's wrong. It's not always right, but it's at least hey, go examine this. You have a feeling, your body tells you. And we're in this movement, we are taught relentlessly to deny the body. There's even drills that you do that teach you to deny the body, to deny the feelings that you're having. And it's couched as something good. You're learning these non-reactionary drills so that when you get confronted in life with something that's difficult, you can stand tall and not react. But the problem is if you train a human being not to react to the negative, they'll also stop reacting to the other emotions. Okay. So I'm curious if this is something that other people in other, authoritarian, high control groups experience, whether if that is something that's common in other high control groups. This concept of denying the nervous system to the point where you eventually end up, a friend of mine said, severing the mind-body connection. Yeah. So I'm just curious about your take on that.
I think in all high control groups they do that. Levels of that in different ways. I know it's funny. I love the Cassiopeians. If you're on my channel, we've been, and they always they don't call us human beings. They call us a mind, body, spirit complex. Because when we're here on planet Earth, we're supposed to be all three. The body is only temporary, yes, and this gets into like the yoga too. And so, if anybody ever ends up in a yoga cult, I want you to hear what I'm saying, because this is where they twist it, right? So the body is a temporary experience for the soul, but the soul, the Shiva, creates the Shakti, so the Purusha creates the matter to live out the experiences of the lessons it needs. Our nervous system, the reason why we're in our body from a spiritual perspective is because of the nervous system, is because of the gut feeling, is because of the body sensation. Because that body sensation is what teaches us, is what refines us. Now, as far as your emotions, those are very important. Even though those are thoughts of the mind, like we could all three have a different emotional reaction. I mean, Catherine, we've talked about this with amusement parks, with like you and your sister, like you're both feeling adrenaline. One is excited, one isn't. So how we interpret that sometimes is different, but that physical feeling is so important. And like, I know in the yoga world, we learn how to examine our emotions, but not react. Like we learn how to, it kind of goes again back to Magdalene's missing gospel. The wisdom of the wrathful person is what Magdalene writes about one of the censored books of the Bible. Like anger is important. Vigilante violence is not good, but anger is good. So if we take that emotion that we're feeling in that body, that sensation, and are able to create wisdom from that so that we can course correct change. And that human empathy, when you eradicate empathy, when you remove that from somebody, then where's the humanity? Where is the humanity? Like if we have no compassion and no empathy, and that is hard for me as a teacher. Like when I see a student struggling on their mat, I have to be educated and trained enough to know like when to keep pushing because I know they're about to have a breakthrough, and when to pull back because I know their nervous system is fried. That's a dance, and in healthy environments, people in authority know that this is important and will try to work with people to honor that system, right? It's the whole body keeps the score thing. And so when you sever the mind-body connection, you're not only severing empathy that someone has from someone else, which again is the humanity, but you're also severing their own humanity with themselves. Because if you can't feel empathy for someone else, how can you feel empathy for yourself? How can you sit back and say, I need to take care of myself now? Like, and that's hard for people to do. I think it's hard for a lot of people to just
That's a really good point.
Have empathy for you, have empathy for the child you were, forgive yourself, to love yourself, to say at this point, and that's Catherine and I, that's our whole, like, I mean, again, my boyfriend says it best, the original yogis were the original conspiracy theorists because they sat around and said, something's not right. And so they sit and create this whole practice is trying to figure out why does the world not feel right? But then it also goes in, I think for us, like I know sometimes I get frustrated with people who are so brainwashed, but even for me to have empathy for people who are in situations of high control, because for them, if you think of it, you put yourself in their shoes, the devil is better than the devil you don't know. And so for kids who grew up in, like, we'll take Scientology, for example, like you or Jamie, if that's all you know, your whole life, like you were born into it. This is your reality. This is all you know. Even though part of your brain is going, this isn't right. This isn't right. I don't like this. I want to leave. The outside world, even if it's just across the street, you don't know that. And even though
yeah, plus I'm being taught that anybody that's not in the inner group is kind of like, they have this term called a wog, which basically means a muggle. So you're trained from birth to kind of, or from whenever you get in it, to start looking at people that are not involved as kind of the unenlightened.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, anytime you're approached by someone, you have a separation. I've been thinking a lot about, what's in the news, I think a lot about, say, Neil Gaiman. Right. I mean, he grew up, a generation ahead of me in the compound in England. Right. His father was a confidant of Hubbard. He grew up in the Inner Navy for a lot of his childhood in the compound in southern England. And, I look at how he's kind of been dealing with his issues or whatever, right? Because of his situation, and how, maybe he could not write the book that he should have written, in the sense that he had these kids with this woman that was still in it at a high level. His sister's still in it. She's in the Inner Navy in England. His mother's still in it. So he was, I look at him as this guy who's trying to like be himself, move on from it, but also hold these relationships together with I'm not in that position. I haven't talked to my mother in 20 years. Who's still involved in my little brother. Most of my family, it's destroyed our family, right? So I was willing to walk away. I thought, if anybody decides that they're not my friend anymore because there's a yellow piece of paper issued one day, then were they ever my friend?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, is that a real friend? Right. So I framed it that way, and that way it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like a crystallization of reality. But I look at somebody like him, because of his kids and him not wanting to alienate his kids, and his wife is a senior person in the organization in Twin Cities. That's why he lived in Wisconsin, 40 minutes away. And then his mother being still in it and a big donor, his sister being in the Inner Navy. You can't blame the guy for wanting to keep his relationships.
Yeah.
But it also probably kept him from self-examination. And this is a brilliant guy that understands human beings, but he kind of had a trap. And then it doesn't surprise me that he would have tendencies of wanting to be sadistic.
Well,
because sadism was reaped upon him. So I wonder about that, if you guys know anything about that, like when you receive a particular type of abuse, then certain times you're then compelled to be able to commit that same abuse to self-regulate.
Yep. That's what
Right. What is that? So
it's just so much in there. I mean, when you were going back to the severing of the mind-body connection, and we often talk about a human trait, but we see this a huge amount in the animal world as well. And so, most people can identify with an animal in a zoo where you see all these awful displacement behaviors and how they've checked out, a bit like the fragmentation that we see in MK Ultra and any form of mind control. And the problem is what a lot of these things, yes, they're fragmenting and breaking that mind-body connection, trying to keep it sort of straightforward here for people in the audience, not because they don't understand, but just because we could literally spend hours discussing this. But when you think about the reptilian part of the brain and taking you back to your instincts, this is why we call it the flight, fright, freeze, or fawn response, where you go back to those raw survival instincts, and we see it in animals. So I've got 2 rescue animals that have come from dogs that have come from a terrible background, huge amount of trauma, like you were, Jamie, born into it, and no way to escape or advocate for themselves. And one of them has come out with the fight response and one with the flight response, both the same emotion, but it's manifesting in different ways, same trauma. Well, obviously not exactly the same trauma. There might be some differences that they've gone through. But I think when you're looking at how that manifests in behavior. What you said about the relationships and that chap, I can't remember the name of the chap you just said, where he's trying to keep one foot in those relationships, because obviously no one wants to have the relationships severed with their children. The problem is then his whole energy signature, let alone the fragmentation and how his trauma is being expressed, but his whole energy vibration is completely scrambled. So how I'd like to explain it is like, so we all have things that where we move on for situations and friends, and it's a bit like the radio dial. You move from one frequency to another frequency, and therefore the people who are the old frequency fall away or reject you or fight against you or something, but there's no longer a coherence there at all. And this is what I think so many people are going through on a much sort of less traumatic scale than what you've been through. But this is why I think we can all learn so much from your book, Jamie, because this explains why people are feeling so off, and that hopefully not many people listening will have been through such trauma. Some might have, but equally this fragmentation of the mind-body connection is being put on all of us. We're all being taught not to trust our senses anymore. Look at the food we're being fed. It's not real food. You know, look at the contaminants everywhere. It's like on a lesser scale, everyone's suffering from this disconnect. And what you're able to show with what you've been through and all the healing work and that you're still going through is you're showing people that these are the tools we need to reconnect it. This is what you need to look out for. Sometimes you need that really extreme example to start to recognize some of these characteristics that probably all of us are displaying to some extent.
You know what I think of when you say that? I mean, I just got this imagery in my head is, we're now at a point where after 2 years, the death toll in Gaza is surpassing 50,000.
Yeah.
That's how many American servicemen died in 20 years of Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I sit here and I ask myself, how could no one care about what happened to the children of this group? What happened to me physically, the physiological gauntlet that I went through, which you can read about. Okay, aside, and then there's the mental part, right? Like I feel equally for the kids that didn't grow up in the inner Navy, but were not allowed to be emotional, were, expressing emotion was a bad thing, or being told that they were a fallen god, so they had to be an adult from the time they were 3. Okay, but this is real, okay? And how that story hasn't been told in its entirety, and how even though maybe I went through more physical abuse with that, how severe is the psychological trauma of that, even without the physical abuse? Is it any less? Okay. Yeah. And so, but yeah, so I think about, gosh, how come the story of the lost children of these generations of people that grew up in this group after 50 years have never really been told? There's been a few really good books where some of these kids have told their story. I don't know that, I've never read one that really goes to the extent of what happened or even come close. For all these kids, no matter what geography they were in around the world, Australia, England, Europe, or Copenhagen, South Mexico. So, I can sit there and it's like in awe, like I get frustrated, like like I've said to you, Bryce, this should have been the first book, right? And I'm saying that like it's too incredible. And then my mind shifts and I say, Gaza's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like there's this, and the world is not screaming. The world, there are not, forget, to me, I would think that if we were connected to what was happening with people trapped in a barrel and how many women and children are dying in that mix that are just completely innocent non-combatants, you would think the world would be on fire with protests. There'd be so many protests that you wouldn't be able to walk down the street at that number.
Yeah.
And so, I wonder about that. Is there a connection between the inability to really truly see what happened to us and the inability to see what's happening right in front of us right now?
You know what I think it is, Jamie, as you were
Yeah.
saying that? Because I hear you on that too, because it's I think that there was a movie that came out a long time ago about everything that happened in Rwanda back, when the slaughters happened. And I remember, I think it was Joaquin Phoenix was in it, and he had a line where he's fleeing and he tells one of the locals, like, oh, and they're like, oh, surely people will come help us. And he goes, no, people are going to see this story on the news and they're going to go about their lives. And that hit me as you're saying that, because I think, we talk about with like cults and high control organizations that they create this us versus them. Like you were talking about with the outsiders, we're the special ones. These are the outsiders. But I think the outsiders do it too. I think when we are confronted with these like these horrific things, I think most people in the world, if they saw this happening right in front of them, there would be an emotional response. But I think we disassociate ourselves from having to accept these horrible things happening because we say, oh, but my family's not Scientology, so that's not happening to me, or that's over in Gaza, that's not happening here in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we create this us versus them from the outsider perspective as well. When reality, if anything, art has told us over the years, human beings are human beings. And it doesn't matter where you live in the world, what religion, these horrible things are happening in but in our minds, we play this separation game. And I think I think what happens is it's for the people that aren't experiencing the trauma as a way for them to regulate themselves, even if it's just subconsciously, because it's so horrific. And when you feel like there's nothing you can do, like as a single human being, there's nothing me, singular, can do about Gaza or Scientology. So we just shut it down and we say, well, that's happening there, not here with me. So that's their problem. Does that make sense? I don't think we do it.
It does. I'm curious it really does. Catherine, I want to say something to what you said, but I'm curious if Catherine wants to chat. What do you think?
I think there's so much in this. Honestly, I could talk to you about all this day. When you look at, say, let's talk about the morphic field. I don't know, about what the field that connects everyone. There's two sides to the coin, and that's very simple. There's one respect, it's a survival mechanism where you shut off. It's like all the MK Ultra experiments they did, where they fragment the mind. It's a survival mechanism, as my understanding, for most mammals, where you will put things that are too traumatic in a separate sort of box in your mind not to deal with. So on that one respect, you've got that. But in another respect, I think it comes back to what you were just talking about earlier, Jamie, about the severing of the mind-body connection. And I think for me, there's been a deliberate agenda over the last goodness knows how many years to keep everyone so busy and so occupied that they cannot connect in with that trauma. Because the thing is, if we weren't so busy, poisoned, trying to survive financially, being led into this awful consumerism that most people, and then look now for the poor younger generations who can't be separated from their device from 1 minute. This is all to do that mind-body severance, not just from your own physical mind-body, but at a wider spiritual level, to disconnect from others in need, whatever species that is. So if you look at they've done loads of studies with bees in a hive, and that bee knows exactly what its role is, and it's sentient, and it's got its own feelings and its own physiology and its own needs, but it has a wider need to perform its role for the greater good. And I think as a humanity, we've had that deliberately severed so that we can't be manipulated.
It's really fascinating. I don't know if you know this, but Hubbard was incredibly fascinated with the techniques of MK Ultra. He talked about it a lot, but he had a different word for it. So he had this expression. The way he described it, it was called, there's an acronym because he has an acronym for everything. He called it PDHing. And PDHing in Hubbardism means pain drug hypnosis. And that you could get anyone to do anything. And we see people doing outrageous things in the world, from sitcoms to whatever. It's because they've gone through this process of pain drug hypnosis. But, so it's just interesting that he talked so much about it and developed his own, word for it. One of the things I was thinking about, I was thinking, Bryce, when you were talking, was this, when you said we're all human beings, like, I don't have a political agenda. I don't give a shit who's the Hatfields and who's the fucking McCoys in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. I don't care. Okay. But they are my brothers and my sisters on both sides.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
and killing people is unacceptable. And killing more people because your people were killed, it doesn't do anything. It just expands. It just creates another 10,000 people, that feel like they have to die for retribution. It just creates a cycle of retribution. But one thing that I was thinking about, Bryce, when you were talking is, the people, like, I feel that what's going on there. I feel it. Maybe, why do I feel it? Well, I had, a lot of near-death experiences, a lot, I even think I took 1 or 2 out because I thought this is becoming ridiculous, right? A lot, but a few, more than a few, maybe you could say several. And I went through this gauntlet that lasted 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was a gauntlet. And if I hadn't had a couple of years off in Oregon, I don't know that I would have made it through. Like, that just took the pressure off for just a couple of years, 2.5 years. Like, I think it saved me. But I've just been thinking, how much is it, like, there's a lot of people that will be watching this are watching it maybe because they've been through the trauma experience. So they're trying to understand the trauma experience from every angle, right? So, what's interesting about it, and maybe this is a positive thing, is when how much of the reason I can feel that and I don't feel completely disassociated with it is because I've been through such a traumatic experience. And is that a positive thing in terms of empathy creation?
I think that shows you have a soul, because you can empathize because you've experienced not the same trauma, but trauma is trauma. And I think that resonates with you. It triggers something inside of you that makes you want to protect. And it's interesting, we're talking about, I was looking through a lot of the Cassiopean forums with the whole Israel thing, and I agree with you. I think both sides are human beings, and in both sides, if you take the government out of it, you've got good people on both sides who would never hurt a fly. Right? They just want to live their lives. But even here in America, we're trained, we're programmed to be so pro-Israel that we cannot see that on the other side of this are other human beings, other fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, babies. And that's where I think, as Catherine, back to what, and L. Ron Hubbard's a very fascinating. I think there was a lot about him that's very close to our 3-letter agencies that my friend Doug was looking at before he passed away, where there's a deeper story there. But the fact that they're able to do this maniacal stuff, as Catherine's saying, naturally we're going to do things with our mind to keep us alive. Like, naturally the mind. I had a therapist once, a trauma therapist, when I started doing EMDR, where she was like, if you can't remember something, we're not going to try to remember it, because there's a reason why, and we're not going to try to do that. So the mind's going to already just to keep us alive. But then these maniacal humans try to expand upon that to create Manchurian candidates. I know the whole Idaho 4, I was texting Catherine, that case is coming back up because more information is coming out, and perhaps Brian Kohberger was a Manchurian candidate. There's more like going, this isn't just conspiratorial stuff. This is like...
No, I believe it. That Manson documentary based on Tom O'Neill's book just came out. And and one of the connections they make in that book is that Charlie Manson they cannot find a connection, like they can't prove it, but they think that one of the things they speculate about in a way that just makes you think is that he was in the hate at the exact same time that Jolly West was doing these experiments in the hate. Yeah. They just can't find the connection. And again, I grew up with this concept of pain drug hypnosis, PDHing long before I ever heard the word MK Ultra. Okay. Yeah. And I believed it. And I believed that you couldn't get a Brian Kohberger or without pain drug hypnosis. And I still wonder, part of me believes that that's true, just because. Yeah. Okay. And one thing that I don't know if you guys know this, but I wonder what you'll think of this, because you both are so, I wouldn't call you, the yogis being the original conspiracy theorists. I love that. That Hubbard was really, really fixated on these agencies, on intelligence, right? Do you know, either of you, did you know that if you were ever in an intelligence agency, or if you had any family member or close friend that was in an intelligence agency, that it disqualifies you to go into Hubbard's inner navy?
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's one of the things they do. Like, if you've done acid, you can't be in the inner navy ever. And if you have any even distant, okay, if you have any distant affiliation to an intelligence agency, or wherever in one, you're persona non grata in what he calls, in his inner navy, what he would call the C organization.
So he's super fascinated with these agencies, but he's also paranoid of them too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Why? I mean, you just made me think of it. Like, what knowledge does he have in terms of what he thinks they do?
Exactly.
Right.
He knows and then more than people understand. I mean, he's not alive now, but I think that's what Doug's work was. Doug was like, this man knew more than we even understand. That's the way I think he was able to create this maniacal little religion, was because there was, I mean, I say this about evil people and evil groups and the establishment all the time. There are many things, but stupid ain't one of them.
And isn't that the whole thing that we're seeing for the whole planetary control at the moment, of the power of the control of our minds? Because I'm assuming knew by that, Jamie, was the fact that once you see it, once you're party, it's like a magician with the magic chair. If you look at the whole mystic arts, and if you look at the whole laws of the universe, whatever you want to call it, the mystic arts, in whatever religion or background they're coming from, the core principles about controlling the energy are the same. And once someone's party to those secrets, you can't unsee it, and therefore you can't control.
I mean, this guy created his own intelligence agency.
Exactly.
Not only did he create his own intelligence agency within his, quote, religious group, but it committed in the 1970s the largest domestic spying campaign in the history of the United States to this day, which resulted at the time in the largest FBI raid in the history of the United States. And one of the things that's in Child X is my experience of being woken up at midnight or 11 o'clock at midnight as a child in that raid. I experienced that raid as a child, and I tell the whole story in the book, right? So just from the child's eye view of that, I'm sure was very different than the way that a parent would experience it. But one thing that just to kind of prove to you what you guys are both saying has true, to show that how we're talking about a conspiracy theory, and I know you guys have been like shadow banned because of your conspiracy theories, but to show you how it's not a conspiracy theory and to kind of bring it into the mainstream, okay, is television. Okay, when I was a kid, one of the things you heard constantly was, you're watching too much TV. Don't watch too much TV. This concept of watching too much TV and the healthy nature of it, or the non-healthy nature of it, was a major part of the American or Western dialogue. Mm-hmm. Okay, now here we are all these years later with the streaming services, and that conversation doesn't exist anymore. It's a bigger economic juggernaut. It's kind of like, what did you binge yesterday?
Yeah.
Oh, I binged all of Squid Game, or I binged all of White Lotus, or and it's been normalized that binging a show is as normal as going to the park.
Yeah. Right.
You don't hear people. It's 500 times worse than it was when we were constantly talking about the health or non-health of it. And we don't hear this conversation. I mean, one of the things that Sean said so casually in our conversation, in our interview, Sean Stone, was he said, when people watch television, they're, if you look at them, if you were just to put a camera on someone watching TV, they're in a hypnotic state.
Yeah.
Completely.
Or at least they look like they are. And again, I'm guilty of that. I'm binging shows. Okay. I'm binging.
Yeah, well, we definitely do to disconnect. I mean, Bryce and I have had whole conversations about this. Is when we want to disconnect from all these subjects we're talking about, we go and watch some binge trash TV, as we call it. But one of the things you said there, Jamie, is like, look at the whole lifestyle we had now. When you get children, when you get adults back out into nature, when you get them interacting with animals, with plants, when you get, the thing is, you start to make that mind-body connection back again. So
that's really powerful. It's really powerful. You know, when it, I don't know if you finished, but I just wanted to comment on that because just, if you don't mind me
carry on. Yeah.
One thing that I would say is, okay, animals and nature make you present. And one thing I think a lot about in terms of like, in terms of the overactive sympathetic nervous system, you know, getting stuck biologically in fight or flight. You know, we have a traumatic incident or we carry toxic stress too long. We have a biological change in our bodies. Yoga and different therapeutics can calm it for a day, but it comes back. And it comes back because what's happened biologically in the body is our nerves that talk to our amygdala, these nerves in our neck, have grown more receptors. So we used to have 4, now we have 16, or now we have 32. And we know that this is a permanent kind of biological effect because we can see it on a brain scan. Okay, people that have had trauma, extensive trauma, or carried out toxic stress too long have a consistently more overactive amygdala. Okay, and when it's really easy for us to accept in the animal kingdom, because if we take a dog or cat, and I give this example all the time, and we just, you know, torture it for a day or even 2 weeks, and then we say we put it up in the Ritz-Carlton for the rest of its life, it's never going to be the same. It's going to be very aggressive fight or very timid flight. We didn't just give that animal disorder. We've changed its biology. Yeah. But one of the things that I think a lot about is, and I give this example a lot when I'm doing interviews, I think I might give it in the book, In the Invisible Machine, is that when you have somebody stuck in fight or flight, right? Like if, say you almost got killed by a panther 2,000 years ago and it's supposed to eat you, but you get away. And now you have this overactive nerve growth lined your amygdala, keeping you stuck in fight or flight all the time. Okay. When our evolutionary biology developed that system, it was in a natural environment. It was in forests and jungles with plants and animals. Okay. So animals and plants and trees naturally mitigate the nervous system.
Yep.
So yeah, you have this thing where, you know, if you're in a tiger-infested jungle, having hypervigilance, having biological hypervigilance or hyperarousal will keep you alive. But it also created that system where there was a natural mitigator constantly calming the system. So now what we have after, this is 100,000 years of human evolution. And then in 200 to 300 years with the first and second industrial revolution, we've removed that system, the mitigator. So now we're getting this more trauma, more stress and allostatic load, more traumatic events. But we're now in a synthetic environment. We live in synthetic environments. We get into a synthetic environment with wheels to go to another synthetic environment where we work under synthetic light all day. And then we get back, this is changing a little bit with COVID. But we've also, in just the last few hundred years, removed the natural system of mitigation against the these biological changes to the nervous system. And I think, that's kind of what Gabor Mate talks about in The Myth of Normal, right? It's a really, really crazy soup. So I wonder, if we could be fine with overactive sympathetics if we were in the Amazon.
Absolutely. And also, sorry, Bryce, I'll let you come on. This is just my favorite subject. But also, one of the things that Bryce and I used to talk about quite a lot a couple of years ago is when you look at how manipulated our history in, even the buildings that we used to live in, were energy chambers to balance
Yes,
out.
yes,
So you had
yes.
the bells, you had the
Criteria.
spires of the church, you had the stained glass windows. So these frequencies, copper pipes everywhere, copper jewelry. So all of the things that brought us back into harmony and were nature's natural cures, even for people that were put in buildings, they were still made out of natural materials, and they were energy channels. The organ, the way an organ is meant to resonate in a
Oh, that's
church.
fascinating. It's
So,
like the middle. It's like the middle ground between in the transition. It's
yeah.
interesting.
So there's so many different environments where you can connect back into this, but we've been deliberately, and I do definitely believe it's deliberately, but deliberately moved away. So all these self-healing mechanisms for not only us, but also our animals. I'm a big, you take people putting metal shoes on horses. It's the most damaging thing you could do. They're not meant to live like that, disconnected from the earth. So this is the thing, is when people start realizing these connections, there's simple daily things that they can do to really allow their body to get rid of and dissipate that energy and take the good frequencies back up from the earth. And I think once people start, the discussions are so important, of not only the effect of the shame and the trauma that you cover in your book, and the awful things that you can explain so eloquently from your Scientology experience, but everyone watching this will be suffering this to a lesser degree. And that's why people aren't on the streets protesting about Gaza and everything
Well,
else.
I mean, what you mean when you think of the horse, it makes me wonder if when you shoe the horse, is that one of the reasons you can better control the horse because you've removed its connection to the ground? And then what's so interesting about talking to you both is you guys have your own disciplines. Bryce comes from this kind of Eastern yoga, Hindu discipline, and you come from this kind of vibrational discipline. And it's funny, when I listen to vibrational stuff, sometimes I can get, kind of cynical, like, oh, are we going to start talking about, something that is woo, right? But then you think about music.
Yep.
Music is vibrational. It's one of the things, one of the most powerful things about music is the bass.
Yeah.
We don't hear the bass, we feel the bass.
Yeah.
Right. So there's something to this concept of the vibrational that's really not woo. And somebody sent me a link recently, and I'm sure both you guys will probably know about this, to this book, and I couldn't believe it's one of the top selling books in the world and has been for a while. I'd never heard of it, about this concept of grounding.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I thought of when you were talking, Catherine. It was one of the ways. Okay. But also, there's something that you could do. There's something you could do in your house.
Yeah, I've got the devices.
That can ground you into the earth. And one of my friends, I used to live in a high rise in my town, in one of those lofts, and I had like floor to ceiling windows of the whole city and the river, and I just thought it was the coolest place in the world. But at one point I decided to move, and I was really kind of not sure if I should be moving and giving up this thing, even though I live in a beautiful place now. And I communicated my neurosis about it to one of my pals, and he said, "Jamie, this is very simple." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Artists should live on the ground."
Yep.
And even though I missed my view, and I missed I'm happier just being on the ground. And I'm not totally grounded, but I find, so it's fascinating stuff, right?
Well, for anybody watching right now, listen, there's a reason why yoga, martial arts, you don't wear shoes. Even in my classes I teach that are more modern, like more cardiovascular, I have people take their shoes off, because the foot, even the bottom of your foot, there's so many receptors to your breathing, to your perineum, which is the base of your energetic body as well. And when your foot's in a shoe all day, and I understand, like, don't go losing your job, like we have to wear shoes and shirts.
Yeah.
But like, if you can take your shoes off, stretch your foot out, make sure that the foot is getting pulling energy up through the earth. That's even if you're inside, like, even if you have to, listen, I live in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia. If I were to take my shoes off in Piedmont Park and jump around, I'd probably be, well, they probably just ignore me, but they probably think I was a crazy person, right? But even just doing that in my own home, animals don't wear, my dog is a rescue. We rescued him from India. And I remember we have a lot of granite here in Georgia. We're like the granite capital. And we have Arabian Mountain. It's outside of Atlanta. It's beautiful. It's this big granite mountain, stone mountain. And we used to go up there a lot, especially when Robbie was a puppy, because there's an area where we can just let him run. Where no one goes back there, and it's granite, and we get charged from it too, from that granite. And I remember this one woman was yelling at us once because it was hot and his paws were burning. Robbie was fine. Robbie will tell us if he was having a blast running around, and and it's like, no, their paws, they've not been, well, besides horses, animals have been allowed to allow their feet, basically their paws, to be in the proper use to regulate their system. We're the dumbasses that strapped ourselves in shoes, mostly us Westerners, but and I do like my stiletto high heels when the right occasion comes, but I'm mostly barefoot most of the time, and it changes even think about that, the way the body changes. If you're barefoot, your body the bones are gonna line up properly, but if you abuse your foot by wearing shoes all the time, it's gonna change your structural body. Now, so that is a wonderful way to start to rebalance yourself, is to, shit, you might look like an idiot, but go hug a tree. Seriously, just
also, yeah, because look, it's so relevant. It's so recent that we've had rubber soles, because up until sort of 100 years ago, at least it was leather.
That's a really good point.
And that's why there's such a resurgence. So the grounding is huge, Jamie, and so important for anyone that's living that. I'm very lucky.
And it's not woo. And if you think it's woo, it's not woo. And here's why we know it's not woo, because all you have to do to change the way you feel is drive into nature. And no matter how stressed out your nervous system instantly goes, whoa. Yeah. Or walk up to a horse, or an elephant, or any animal, and even your cat, and your nervous system goes, right? So we know, we can see every day, if we pay attention, that these things reduce our allostatic load. They reduce our, they calm the nervous system. Yeah,
running water too. Running water is really good. It's like,
oh yeah, there you go. There you go.
Water, and that's even your shower too. Like, you get energy from running hours. Still water brings your energy down, so that's why people take hot baths at night, to relax them. And so it's working. And our ancestors knew this. Like, our ancestors absolutely knew this. This was, I feel like the witch trials, that's what they were doing, was getting rid of people who actually knew these simple techniques to like rebalance yourself. But it's interesting. Speaking of outside, I've been meaning to ask you, Jamie and Catherine, have you, speaking of trauma, because this show is actually about major trauma, is what this show is about. Have you watched Yellow Jackets?
No,
I haven't. Should I?
It's about, so basically it's about there's two timelines. There's the 1996 timeline and the present day timeline. And it's about a girls soccer team from New Jersey in the 90s. So I like it because it's nostalgic, because they play a bunch of 90s music. That's my generation. And they're going to nationals in Washington State, but they take a private flight and they have to go around Canada because of a storm. Well, the plane goes down and these girls get stuck. The soccer team gets stuck in the Toronto, the Ontario wilderness for 19 months before they're rescued. And so they're following two timelines: what's happening in the woods in 1996, and then what's happening to them as adults after and that the cast is huge. It's Juliette Lewis, Christina Ricci,
who's still in, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about her, because she's now claiming to be a Christian, but I'm like, are you really a Christian?
Is that true? Is she true? Is that true?
I read somewhere that she's an incredible actress, and she doesn't.
No, but what I will say that it's not unusual for some people that have been involved with Scientology or still involved with it to claim that they're a Christian and that Scientology doesn't conflict with Christianity, which is. Yeah. Which is, Hubbard talked out both sides of his mouth. It's absolutely not true. He basically called Jesus the Antichrist and something. So and the reality is that as you go up in the levels, you're not, anything that deviates from his words, it becomes other practices, and it's not allowed. Right. But so she could easily be saying that and also still be completely involved.
And I don't know. It's just a huge Melanie Lewinsky, Hillary Swank.
Okay, yeah, okay. All right. So, all right, I'll check it out.
Okay. What's interesting, because even Christina Ricci in her interviews, because the younger cast is played by younger, they Samantha Hannerty and Christina Ricci played the same person, but older, and basically Christina Ricci's like, this is a story about PTSD. Because these girls are stuck in this wilderness. They end up resorting to cannibalism. That's not a giveaway. That you know that by the first episode, where they and the way that happens, the way that unfolds is so natural. And you think there's a paranormal twist to it, but you're starting to learn that there's no paranormal, and nothing paranormal is happening. Their minds are like they're losing their minds, basically, being stuck without.
I thought I watched an episode. Why I turned it off was that there were people watching them on cameras.
Oh no, that's not different show then, because no one's
really?
watching. Yeah, that might be Severance. No, this is Yellow Jackets.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna watch. All right, I'm gonna watch Yellow Jackets.
They talked about having to do the 90s were the cutoff for the younger when they were trying to figure out the timelines, because the 90s was the last. This was the last moment before cell phones, computers.
Yeah.
To make it realistic that they would actually be lost, because if that happened today, somebody's phone would be tracked.
Oh God.
And to see what's and to me, I mean, it's a crazy story. It's a crazy story, but I find that fascinating to see the 1996 timeline of teenage girls whose brain is not fully developed, who have no survival skills whatsoever because they are upper middle class New Jersey kids who don't know how to survive, having to learn how to survive. That being abandoned.
I'm gonna watch. Don't tell me too much now. I want to watch it.
But yeah.
As an adult, like the way the women have to play them as and how 20-something years later, their lives are still so heavily impacted by this 19 months.
Okay.
And why you're talking, I'm like, this is an incredible. What is mirroring this story that's fictional, but could, that very well could have happened at some, and so I just, I would love for you to watch season 3 is almost over. I would love for both of you to watch it and have a conversation, because especially for you, Jamie, to see like how, because the trauma you went through was huge and that these fictional characters also went through kind of a similar, like really big, like this type of trauma doesn't happen to everyone, right? And what you pick up from this storyline and what the writers are what story are they really trying to tell? Is this really a story about girls who survived an airplane crash, or is this a story of trauma and how the human has to survive?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that, somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago in an interview, said to me, why now?
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of reasons why now, but one of the reasons why now is I'm just at a point where I can see the value of it to people outside of it, in terms of healing. I feel like one of the main message for me in Child X probably is how you can plug in, how you can be so far gone that you're surely dead.
Yeah.
And still come back. How does one do that? Because so many of the kids I grew up with are dead, or they're the walking dead. They're from suicide or drug addiction, or they just can't function. So how do you do that? How do you go so far back you can't come back and come back anyway? And so I explain in Child X how to do that, or how I did it, even though I was stumbling in the dark, but it's very specific of what I plugged into that made that possible. And then in Hybrid, I feel like it's a supernatural story in a lot of ways, but I basically talk about how I used art and beauty to get out of it. But I think that even if you're not an artist, I think what Hybrid is basically saying is you can use meaning to get back, right? So I'm looking forward to both those things being in the world and having them reflected back at me, so I could see how other people experience it. But the main reason why now is hopefully there's something in there that no matter what somebody's experiencing, they can watch this, they can read it, and feel hope and see a way.
That's just so lovely. And
Yeah.
how and when can people get Child X?
Child X is available for pre-order. Just Google my name or Child X. Hopefully you guys can share the links in the chat.
It'll be in the description box for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then Hybrid is also now available for pre-order.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So if you Google Hybrid with an E, HYBRED, I keep sending people the link from the Harvard bookstore because I think it looks really cool on their interface. But that's now out for pre-order, and you know, they're almost the same. You know, again, because I was never going to write the real story. There's several scenes that are exactly the same in both books because I was taking from real life to tell a story. But I really do think that if you've ever been in a place where you feel completely trapped, I think read Child X, because there's a lot of traps and mazes, too many. And if you're interested in that story, I would ask you to please pre-order it, because if you pre-order it, then my publisher will print more copies and it has a better chance of, you know, permeating through the world. But it really is not just about, one of the reasons why now is I started to see it as that it could be a contribution to literature on a human level, not just this horrible thing that happened to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Bryce. I could carry on talking to you forever.
Yeah.
The links for all Jamie's links will be below, and for Bryce's links below. So please do go to there, check it out. Let's all pre-order, and then I can't wait to see everyone's comments and questions. And we're quite happy to come back again and answer those. So thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Bryce.
Thank you, guys. This was a beautiful conversation.
Take care.